I disagree with his conclusions, but I don't necessarily disagree with his critique of the paper. I think one of the weaknesses is the discussion of comparative advantage for many of the reasons that Doug pointed out. I think there is some improvements could be made in clarifying the treatment of NAFTA in the initial statistical analysis, because we have an integrated production network in North America that links plants in Mexico, the United States, and Canada, and so one cannot talk about competitiveness without recognizing that network, which is the result of the integration that started decades and decades ago and was encouraged further by the NAFTA 15 years ago. The model that Dr. Nam uses does take account of NAFTA. It's one of the few free trade agreements that is built into the GTAP model. But the model is based, as Dr. Nam said, on 2001 data, and so he is not sized up or in some way adjusted for the change in markets and trade, which has been very significant over the past 7 years, and therefore the numbers that he comes up with are much lower than those that were reported in the study of the KORUS FTA by the U.S. International Trade Commission. Interestingly, the Commission reported that while there would be a significant increase in net trade in autos with Korea, that much of this, or more than half of that, would result from trade diversion. And I don't know what their assumptions are with regard to exchange rates and the like, but I think that conclusion is probably as worrisome to Japanese and European automakers as it is to the United Auto Workers Unions. In terms of competitiveness, U.S. manufacturers of autos generally do not export outside of North America. When they produce for foreign markets, they usually invest in those markets, as GM's done in Korea, as GM and Ford done in Europe, as is done in South America. If you look at the net exports of the gross exports of the United States, net of NAFTA trade, it's relatively small part of U.S. production. And so you can't really talk about the U.S. not exporting as a surrogate for judging the competitiveness of U.S. firms. GM is a very competitive firm, but it's losing a lot of money in the U.S. market. And the real problem is, why are U.S. firms having problems in the U.S. market while they're doing better elsewhere? And that, I don't think, can be answered because of the impact of trade agreements. One thing that has been sorely missing from the discussion all morning, though it's been touched upon by earlier speakers, is an understanding of what's going on in the Korean market. Dan gave a very good explanation of the supply side of that market, but very little on the demand side. Why is it that there have been flat sales for so many years? Why? The Korean market is only about, sales in the Korean market each year are about 1.2 million sales. U.S. sales are about 16 million last year, down, as noted, down from peaks of well over 7 million earlier this decade. The size of the markets are just not comparable. and it's hard for me to imagine how, even if the UAW got everything it wanted out of changes in the Korean regime, that it would make that much difference in terms of U.S.-based exports to the Korean market. It's just not that big a market. But we don't understand why the Korean market hasn't grown. Is it saturated? Are the costs just too high? Is that a factor of taxation or fuel costs? I discount what I've heard in Korea that there's just not enough room to park cars anymore. Because I've also noticed in Seoul that people are very imaginative on how to take cars around the city, and so that is perhaps a little exaggerated. But we don't know why at least we haven't been told yet today why the Korean market has been relatively stagnant. And that affects sales domestically of domestic producers, and it affects the level of demand for imports. And it is one of the factors why there has been this big export push. But I think it's only one of the small factors. GM exports most of the cars that it produces in Korea to other countries. There's also, in thinking about going forward, there's been little discussion of what the impact of the decline in the yen, in the won-yen cross rate will be for Korean producers in foreign markets, particularly in Asia, and what it means in terms of competition between Korean brand cars and Japanese brand cars in the U.S. market. That's the bone of contention on whether the 2.5% U.S. tariff makes any difference. I don't think it makes much of a difference, because the Korean producers have had to eat it to compete on price against Japanese cars in the U.S. market. So whether you had an FTA or not, there's going to be that competition. Now, what are the real issues then in the FTA? I think if you take as your counterfactual that no FTA, then the predictions that Doug has for his auto workers are probably true. The status quo in the U.S. market is bad news for domestic, for traditional plants of the big three automakers. They are burdened with heavy costs in terms of non-wage compensation. That's a factor in the U.S. market that affects the competitiveness of U.S. production vis-a-vis outside. They are burdened in part by U.S. tax laws that have to some degree inhibited investment in though there are many other factors. I think most of the remedies or what ails the firms that have paid workers from Doug's business are primarily domestic-based remedies, and that's why I said that in the paper that Doug quoted from. I think it's something that the Congress should be concerned about because of the employment trends, though the numbers I get from BLS are a little different from the ones that were posted up a little before, but the trend is the same. There's been a reduction of several 100,000 workers producing autos and auto parts in the United States over the last few years, and next. And so that obviously is going to translate into political concerns, and the political issue is going to have to be addressed as well as the economic issue if the KORUS FTA is going to be implemented in both countries. I've presented you have before you a